There comes a moment in every human life when the ground disappears. Not metaphorically, literally. You look down and realize that the person who was holding you up, the mentor, the father, the season, the security, the relationship, the identity, is gone. And the abyss that remains has your name written at the bottom. Joshua knew that abyss. 40 years of faithful service. 40 years carrying the sandals of a man who made water obey. 40 years in second place. 40 years being called Moses' assistant, and then in a single day, everything ended. Moses died, and God looked at Joshua, this man haunted by the weight of an impossible inheritance, and said something that will change your life today. What God said was not comfort. It was a command for war. Before we enter the word, I need you to do something. Close your eyes for a second. Think about the most impressive person who has ever passed through your life. That father who seemed fearless. That leader who changed the atmosphere of a room just by walking in. That mentor who solved in one sentence what you couldn't solve in months. Now imagine that person dies. And the next day at the funeral, someone walks up to you with 2 million people behind them and says, "Now it's your turn." There is no greater pressure on earth than that. This is not motivation. This is existential terror. And that is exactly what Joshua faced. But here is what no one told you. Joshua was not a superhero. He was a man who trembled. And the God of the universe chose exactly that man, the one who trembled, to do the most impossible thing in human history. Why? Because God never looks for the brave. He creates courage inside the available. And today, this message will reveal to you the 7 layers of the code that transformed a frightened assistant into a legendary conqueror. But be careful. This is not a success story. This is surgery. And like every surgery, it will hurt before it heals. Joshua chapter 1, verse 1. 8 words that change everything. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord. Stop there for a moment. How many times have you rushed past this sentence, trying to get to the Jordan or the walls of Jericho? But the genius of God is in this opening. God does not begin by saying, "Joshua, I have an amazing plan for you." God begins with an obituary. Moses is dead. Not Moses passed away. Not Moses is in a better place. Dead, direct, final. And here is the first secret of the Joshua Code. The command to move forward rarely waits for your emotional comfort. There was a word used to describe Joshua's position. Mesheret. It means servant, assistant, the one at someone's disposal. Joshua did not have an independent identity. He was always Joshua, son of Nun, or Joshua, servant of Moses. 40 years as number 2. 40 years in someone else's shadow, and then suddenly, Moses disappears, and all eyes turn to Joshua, but not with admiration, with expectation. And expectation is the dangerous cousin of disappointment. And in that moment, at the peak of insecurity, at the depth of grief, when Joshua was most vulnerable, God spoke. And notice what he did not say. He did not say, "I know this is hard." He did not say, "Take your time." He did not say, "You'll be okay." God said, "Get up now. Cross this Jordan now, not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, now. Your greatest enemy is not the giant in front of you. Your greatest enemy is your attachment to what's behind you. As long as you keep looking at the place where Moses disappeared, you will never see the Jordan you need to cross. Let me ask you something directly. Who is the Moses in your life? Maybe it was a person, a relationship, a season, a version of yourself. The one who was stronger, braver, untouched by the scars you carry today. Listen carefully. Your Moses is dead. Not because it was weak, but because your next season cannot be built on someone else's shadow. The promised land requires a Joshua, and the only Joshua available is you. To understand how Joshua became who he became, we need to go back 40 years. We need to go to a place called Kadesh Barnea. And we need to understand the most destructive crime a human being can commit against themselves. Israel had just left Egypt. They had crossed the Red Sea. They had seen the most powerful army in the world drown before their eyes. And then God gives a command. Send men to spy out the land. 12 men are chosen, 12 leaders, the best of the best, Joshua, son of Nun, Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and 10 others. 40 days of exploration, 40 days walking through the promised land, seeing its abundance, measuring its cities, observing its people. And they came back carrying proof. A cluster of grapes so large it had to be carried between 2 men. And the report began well. The land truly flows with milk and honey. But then came the word that destroys destinies. But the people are strong. The cities are fortified, and we saw giants there. And then came the sentence that buried an entire generation. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. Read that again. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes. The giants never called them grasshoppers. The giants never humiliated them. They humiliated themselves. This is what I call the grasshopper mentality. It is not a lack of ability. It is a distorted perception of yourself that contaminates how you interpret reality. 2 people can walk into the same opportunity. One sees possibility, the other sees impossibility. The difference is not in the opportunity. The difference is in the lens. And here is the most dangerous part. The lens you used to see the world was not chosen by you. It was installed by past experiences, by rejection, by voices that told you you're not enough, by failures you turned into identity instead of lessons. The 10 spies did not become grasshoppers overnight. That mentality was built over 430 years of slavery. But here is the question no one asks. Why were Joshua and Caleb different? They saw the same land, the same giants, the same walls, but they reached a completely different conclusion. Why? Because the 10 spies compared themselves to the giants. Joshua and Caleb compared everything to the promise. When you measure yourself against the problem, you will always feel too small. But when you measure the problem against the promise, it will always be too small. That is the difference. And the consequence was brutal. An entire generation died in the desert, not because they lacked strength, but because they rejected the identity God had given them. They were not grasshoppers, but they believed they were. And belief shapes destiny. Joshua spent 40 years watching that consequence unfold. 40 years burying people who were supposed to inherit the promise. 40 years holding on to something that everyone else had already given up on. That kind of experience creates a different kind of faith. A faith that survives 40 years of no is the only kind of faith strong enough to bring down walls. Now we arrive at the core of the Joshua Code. This is not abstract theology. This is mental engineering. This is the system that separates those who arrive from those who remain stuck. And it was delivered in a single instruction. Do not let this book of the law depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night. At first glance, this sounds like a generic religious instruction. But in the original Hebrew, everything changes. The word meditate is Hagah. And Hagah does not mean silent reflection. It means to murmur, to speak under your breath, to growl like a lion over its prey. God was telling Joshua something very specific. You are surrounded by voices of fear, doubt, and defeat. If you do not actively replace those voices, they will take over your mind. This was not about religion. This was about survival. When you speak something out loud, your brain processes it differently. It becomes more real, more reinforced, more rooted. Joshua was instructed to speak the word continuously, not as ritual, but as a weapon. Because any mind that is not intentionally built from within will be shaped by the noise from outside. And Joshua was surrounded by noise. Millions of people raised in fear, raised in limitation, raised in the memory of failure. If Joshua did not build an internal narrative stronger than the external one, he would collapse like the generation before him. Hagah was his defense, his protection, his mental discipline. Moses led through visible miracles. Joshua had to lead through internal conviction. And that is a higher level of faith, because anyone can believe when they see, but only a few can move forward when there is no evidence. Now we reach the breaking point, the moment where everything changes. Go back with me to Kadesh Barnea. The 10 spies have just delivered their report of fear. The people are in panic, crying, complaining, ready to go back to Egypt. They preferred known chains over unknown freedom. And in that exact moment, when the entire crowd was collapsing, Joshua and Caleb did something that makes no sense. They stood up and said, "The land we passed through is exceedingly good. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into it." And then they said something that defies logic. "Do not fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. They are our bread, not we can defeat them, not we might overcome. They are our food." Joshua did not see giants as enemies. He saw them as nourishment. That is a complete inversion of perspective. In the grasshopper mentality, you are the prey. You run. You hide. You hope to survive. But in the mindset of inheritance, everything changes. The giant is not your threat. The giant is your source of growth, because there is something you receive from overcoming a giant that you cannot get anywhere else. Small victories build small confidence. But when you overcome something that seemed impossible, something shifts inside you permanently. You don't just win, you become someone else. And Joshua understood something deeper. He said, "Their protection has been removed." In Hebrew, the word is tsel, shadow, covering, protection. Joshua was saying, yes, they are big. Yes, the walls are strong. Yes, by human logic, this is impossible. But look deeper. Their protection is gone. They look strong, but they are already defeated. This is one of the most powerful truths of the Joshua Code. Not every giant that looks invincible is still protected. Some problems in your life look massive on the outside, but inside, they are already collapsing. They are waiting for someone who is willing to move forward, someone who stops treating food like a predator. So let me ask you directly, what is your giant? Not a generic one. Yours. The one with a name. The one that stops you every time you try to move forward. A financial wall. A diagnosis. A broken relationship. A voice inside your head telling you that you are not enough. The Joshua Code does not promise that your giant will disappear. It promises something better. When you get close enough, you will realize it was never there to destroy you. It was there to build you. Now we arrive at one of the most mysterious moments in the entire story. Joshua chapter 5. Israel has already crossed the Jordan. They renewed the covenant. The manna stopped. For the first time in 40 years, they are eating from the land. Everything is shifting. And Joshua is alone, standing near Jericho, looking at the walls. And suddenly, he sees a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword. Joshua walks up to him and asks, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" It is a natural question, but it is the wrong question, because the answer is no. I am the commander of the army of the Lord. That answer changes everything. The figure refuses Joshua's categories. I did not come to take your side. I came to take command. And in that moment, Joshua understands something that frees him completely. He was never the leader. He was never the one in control. He was never responsible for carrying the weight of the outcome. He was a servant. The battle was never his, and everything shifts. Joshua falls to the ground and worships, and the commander says, "Take off your sandals. The place where you stand is holy." The same command given to Moses. This was not just an angel. This was a divine encounter. And in that moment, all the pressure Joshua carried disappears, because he realizes victory does not depend on him being enough. It depends on him surrendering to the one who already is. Now we arrive at the climax. But before Jericho falls, something more important happens. A battle that no one sees, a battle inside Joshua's mind. Because Jericho was not just a city, it was a symbol of everything that looked impossible. Massive walls, fortified structure, a gateway that had to fall before anything else could happen. And then God gives the strategy, and the strategy makes no sense. Walk around the city once a day for 6 days. No attack, no weapons, no engagement, just walking. Then on the 7th day, walk around it 7 times and shout. From a human perspective, this is absurd. It exposes the army. It creates tension. It looks ridiculous to the enemy watching from the walls. But the strategy was never about military logic. It was about internal alignment, because Joshua gave one very specific command. Do not speak for 6 days. No talking, no complaining, no opinions. Silence. And silence is dangerous, because when external noise stops, internal noise gets louder. Doubt gets louder. Fear gets louder. Every insecurity rises to the surface. God was forcing them to face their own thoughts. Those who had built themselves internally could sustain it. Those who hadn't were collapsing inside. This was not just a march, it was a test of what was happening inside each person. And then comes the 7th day, 7 laps. And Joshua gives the command, shout, for the Lord has given you the city, has given, past tense, not will give, already given. The shout was not to cause the victory. The shout was the expression of a victory already established. And then, the walls fell. But here is what matters most. The walls did not fall in Joshua's mind at that moment. They had already fallen days before, when he accepted that Moses was gone, when he rejected the grasshopper mentality, when he built his mind through discipline, when he surrendered to the true commander. Jericho did not fall because of a shout. Jericho fell because Joshua had already won the internal battle. The external collapse was just the echo. Now I need to speak directly to you, not to Joshua, to you. You are here because something in this story connected with you. That is not random. There is a Jordan in your life right now. There is a promise in front of you. There is a giant waiting. And there is a decision that only you can make. So let me summarize the code. First, what is gone is gone. You cannot build your future on something that no longer exists. Second, your perception of yourself is not always truth. Sometimes it is conditioning. Third, if you do not control your inner voice, your environment will control it for you. Fourth, the thing you fear the most may be the very thing that will build you. Fifth, you are not in control, and that is not weakness. That is freedom. Sixth, the real battle is internal before it is external. And finally, victory is not something you wait for. It is something you step into. So if you are standing in front of your Jordan, step. If you are facing your giant, move forward. If you are looking at your walls, don't wait for proof. Act. Because the difference between those who inherit and those who wander is not talent. It is decision. You are not a grasshopper. You are not second place. You are not defined by what you lost. You are a successor. And the table is already set. So get up and take your place. There is something uncomfortable about Joshua's story that most people ignore. None of the victories came from creativity. They came from obedience. Joshua did not design the strategy for Jericho. He did not innovate the crossing of the Jordan. He did not create the system. He followed instructions. And that confronts something deep inside human nature. Because we like control. We like to feel like we are the ones figuring things out. But the Joshua Code is built on a different foundation, not independence, but alignment. There is a level of success that comes from intelligence, but there is another level that only comes from obedience, and most people never reach it, because obedience feels like weakness to the ego. It feels like losing control. But in reality, it is the only way to access what is beyond your control. Joshua did not need a better strategy. He needed a deeper trust, and that is where most people fail, not in effort, but in surrender. After Jericho, something subtle happens. A small deviation, a hidden compromise. A man named Achan takes something that was not supposed to be taken, and suddenly, everything changes. Israel goes from victory to defeat, from confidence to confusion, from unstoppable to vulnerable. And the problem was not external, it was internal. One hidden decision affected an entire nation. This is one of the most dangerous truths. You don't collapse because of one big failure. You collapse because of small, tolerated compromises. The things you say, it's not a big deal about. The things you hide, the things you justify. The Joshua Code does not work with divided integrity, because what you hide eventually controls you, and what you tolerate eventually grows. Victory is not just about what you confront outside, it is about what you refuse to allow inside. There is a silent shift that happens after success. You stop depending, not consciously, but gradually. After victories, after breakthroughs, after things start working, you begin to trust yourself more than the process that got you there. And that is where danger begins. Because Joshua's greatest threat was not the giants. It was familiarity. The moment something becomes normal, you stop treating it as sacred. The discipline weakens, the attention fades, the dependence disappears, and what once required faith becomes routine. But the truth is, the moment you stop depending, you start drifting, and drift is silent. You don't notice it immediately, but it takes you far from where you were supposed to be. Joshua had to learn that every battle required the same level of dependence, not less, not adjusted. The same, because consistency is what protects what success builds. Leading is heavy, not because of the responsibility, but because of the isolation. Joshua stood in front of millions, but there were moments when he stood completely alone. No one to ask, no one to confirm, no one to carry the weight with him, and that is something most people don't talk about. The higher you go, the fewer voices you can trust. Because leadership is not just about guiding others. It is about sustaining clarity when no one else sees what you see. Joshua could not afford confusion. He could not afford emotional instability, because one unstable decision at the top multiplies at the bottom. And this is why leadership is not about charisma. It is about stability. It is about being anchored when everything around you is moving. And that kind of stability is not built in public. It is built in silence. There is a moment after every victory where energy drops, where motivation fades, where the adrenaline is gone, and what remains is discipline. Joshua did not conquer one city. He had to conquer many. And every new battle required the same intensity, the same focus, the same courage. This is where most people fail, not in starting, but in continuing. Because starting is emotional, continuing is commitment. There will be days when you don't feel ready. Days when nothing inside you wants to move forward. Days when the weight feels heavier than the reward. And those are the days that define everything. Because consistency is not built when you feel strong, it is built when you choose to move, even when you feel nothing. Joshua did not become a conqueror in one moment. He became one decision at a time. At the end of Joshua's life, something powerful happens. He gathers the people, and he makes a declaration. Choose this day whom you will serve. But then he says something even stronger. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. This is not about religion. This is about legacy. Joshua understood something most people ignore. What you build externally will not matter if it is not sustained internally. He did not just want to conquer land. He wanted to establish a standard, because success without legacy disappears. But a life aligned with purpose multiplies. Joshua was not thinking about his moment. He was thinking about what would remain after him. And that is the final layer of the code. You are not just building a life. You are building something that will outlive you. Before any external battle is fought, there is a war happening inside your head. A war of voices. One voice says, "You're not ready." Another says, "You've failed before." Another whispers, "What if it goes wrong again?" And then there is a quieter voice. The one that doesn't scream, the one that doesn't panic, the one that simply says, "Move." Most people don't fail because of lack of opportunity. They fail because they listen to the wrong voice. Joshua had every reason to doubt, every reason to hesitate, every reason to question himself. But he learned something critical. Not every voice deserves your attention, and the voice you feed becomes the voice that leads. If fear is louder than truth, you will retreat. If truth becomes louder than fear, you will advance. That is where the real battle is won. 40 years. That is how long the promise seemed delayed. 40 years of waiting. 40 years of uncertainty. 40 years of watching others fall while holding on to something unseen. And here is where most people break. They confuse delay with denial. They assume that because it didn't happen when they expected, it will never happen. But Joshua's story proves something different. Delay is not rejection. Delay is preparation. There are things you are asking for that you are not yet ready to carry. Not because you are weak, but because what you are asking for requires a version of you that does not yet exist. Joshua at year 1 could not handle what Joshua at year 40 carried. The time was not wasted. It was building capacity. So if you feel like things are taking too long, maybe it's not that nothing is happening. Maybe something is being built inside you that you cannot see yet. There is always a cost to becoming who you are meant to be, and most people are not prepared for it, because we want the promise, but we resist the process. We want the outcome, but we avoid the transformation. Joshua did not just inherit a land. He paid for it with years of obscurity, years of silence, years of being overlooked, and that is the part nobody celebrates. Because becoming requires letting go of who you used to be. And that is painful. It means releasing old identities, old habits, old ways of thinking. You cannot step into a new level with an old version of yourself. Something has to die. And the sooner you accept that, the faster you grow. Fear rarely presents itself as fear. It disguises itself as logic. I'm just being realistic. I need more time. This is not the right moment. And it sounds reasonable. It sounds intelligent. But underneath, it is still fear. The 10 spies did not say, "We are afraid." They presented data, facts, observations. But their conclusion was driven by fear. And that is what makes it dangerous. Because when fear sounds logical, it becomes harder to challenge. Joshua had the same data, the same facts, the same reality. But he reached a different conclusion, because he was not interpreting reality through fear. He was interpreting it through faith. And that changes everything. There comes a moment where thinking is no longer enough. Analyzing is no longer enough. Waiting is no longer enough. There comes a moment where you have to decide. And decision is powerful. Because once a real decision is made, movement follows. Joshua did not wait until he felt no fear. He decided, despite the fear. He moved with uncertainty. He acted without full clarity. And that is what separates leaders from observers. Observers wait for certainty. Leaders move with conviction, and conviction is not the absence of doubt. It is the decision to move anyway. Your life does not change when you understand more. It changes when you decide. What you tolerate becomes normal. What you repeat becomes natural. What you accept becomes your standard. Joshua led a generation that had to unlearn the desert because they had normalized survival, scarcity, limitation, and now they had to step into abundance. And that is harder than it sounds, because your mind always tries to return to what feels familiar. Even if what is familiar is not good, even if what is familiar is limiting. Growth requires breaking what has become normal, and that is uncomfortable, because it forces you into the unknown. But nothing new can grow inside an old standard. If you want a different life, you need a different normal. There is a moment in every transformation where there is no going back, not because you can't physically return, but because something inside you has changed. Joshua reached that moment when he stepped into the Jordan. Once his feet touched the water, there was no retreat. And that is what most people avoid. They want transformation without commitment. They want change without crossing the line. But real change happens when you remove the option of going back. When retreat is no longer available, progress becomes the only direction. There are moments when God speaks clearly, and there are moments when he is silent. And the silence can be unsettling, because in silence, doubts grow, questions rise, uncertainty increases. But silence is not absence. Silence is a test of whether you will continue even without new instructions. Joshua did not receive constant directions. There were moments where he had to move forward, based on what had already been said. And that is where maturity is revealed. Not when you hear something new, but when you remain faithful to what was already given. Expectation can either elevate you or crush you. Joshua carried the weight of millions. Every decision mattered, every step was watched, and expectation creates pressure. But pressure reveals something. It reveals what you are built on. If your identity is based on approval, pressure will break you. But if your identity is anchored in purpose, pressure will refine you. Joshua was not trying to impress people. He was committed to the mission, and that made all the difference. Comparison is one of the fastest ways to lose clarity. Joshua could have spent his life comparing himself to Moses, comparing styles, comparing outcomes, comparing impact, and if he had done that, he would have failed. Because he was not called to be Moses, he was called to be Joshua, and that requires a different expression, a different approach, a different strength. Comparison distracts you from your assignment, and when you lose focus, you lose direction. Your path is not supposed to look like someone else's. And the moment you accept that, you begin to move with clarity. Failure tests you, but success tests you differently. Because success can deceive. It can make you believe you are the source. It can make you relax. It can make you forget what got you there. Joshua had to remain grounded, even after victories. Because success is not the end. It is another test. And many people pass the test of failure, but fail the test of success. Stay focused. Stay disciplined. Stay aligned. Because what brought you up must be maintained to keep you there. Consistency is not exciting. It is not dramatic. It is not emotional, but it is powerful. Joshua's story is not built on one moment. It is built on repeated actions, repeated obedience, repeated discipline, day after day, battle after battle. And that is what creates real results, not intensity, but consistency. Anyone can be strong for a moment. Few can remain steady over time. And that is what separates temporary success from lasting impact. What people see is the result. What they don't see is the preparation. Joshua's public victories were built on private discipline. Moments no one watched, decisions no one celebrated, time no one noticed. And that is where real strength is built, in the unseen, because what you do in private determines what you can sustain in public. If you skip the hidden work, you won't sustain the visible results. Everything changes when identity is clear. If you see yourself as weak, you will act accordingly. If you see yourself as limited, you will stay within limits. But when identity shifts, behavior follows. Joshua no longer saw himself as an assistant. He saw himself as a leader, not because of position, but because of alignment. Identity is not what people call you. It is what you accept internally. And once that changes, everything else follows. There comes a point where paths separate, those who move forward and those who stay behind. And the difference is not always visible at first, but over time, it becomes clear. Joshua moved. Others hesitated. Joshua believed. Others doubted. Joshua acted. Others waited. And eventually, their outcomes reflected their choices. Life always reveals the difference between decision and hesitation. This is where everything comes together. Because this is no longer about Joshua. It is about you. You have heard the story. You have seen the pattern. You understand the principles. Now there is only one question left. What are you going to do with it? Because knowledge without action changes nothing. Understanding without movement leads nowhere. There is a step in front of you, a decision waiting, an action required, and no one can take it for you. So this is the moment. Not tomorrow, not later. Now, rise, move, step forward, because everything you are looking for is on the other side of that decision.